Julian Davenport surveyed his kingdom from the 40th floor penthouse of Davenport Tower, the gleaming monument to his ambition. Below the city sprawled like a circuit board a network he had mastered. He had it all: the billions, the skyscraper, and the stunning new wife Chloe, draped over a chaise lounge behind him. Yet his thoughts drifted to the one person who had escaped his orbit, his ex-wife Eleanor. He pictured her in some dreary, cramped apartment, struggling to make ends meet, a testament to her folly for leaving him. He felt a familiar, satisfying pang of pity. Today he would finally confirm his suspicions. Today he would pay her a visit. The name Julian Davenport was synonymous with ruthless success. He hadn't been born into money. He'd clawed his way up from a middle-class background with a ferocious appetite for risk and an almost sociopathic disregard for those he trampled on the way up. His company, Davenport Digital Solutions, had revolutionized data security, and in doing so had made him a billionaire before his 35th birthday. His life was a meticulously curated exhibition of wealth. His penthouse office was a sterile masterpiece of glass and chrome overlooking Central Park. His suits were bespoke. Tom Ford, his watches were Patek Philippe, and his car was a graphite gray McLaren that seemed to snarl even when parked. His second wife, Chloe, was the perfect accessory to this life. 26 years old, a former runway model with sharp cheekbones and an even sharper understanding of their transactional marriage, she was everything his first wife Eleanor had not been. Where Eleanor was quiet, Chloe was loud. Where Eleanor was modest, Chloe was ostentatious. Where Eleanor had preferred a quiet evening with a book, Chloe demanded to be seen at every gala, charity auction, and exclusive club opening. Darling Chloe's voice, smooth as silk but laced with steel, cut through his reverie. She stretched languidly, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the afternoon light. "Are you still brooding about her?" Julian turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "I'm not brooding, Chloe. I'm being a responsible father. Leo's birthday is next week. I need to drop off his gift." Chloe pouted a practiced expression of delicate grievance. "Can't you just have it couriered? It's what normal divorced people do." "And since when are we normal?" Julian countered, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Besides, I haven't seen where she's living. I need to ensure Leo's environment is adequate." The word adequate hung in the air, heavy with condescension. In Julian's mind, adequate for Eleanor would be a small, two-bedroom apartment in a decent but soul-crushingly boring suburban neighborhood, probably decorated with second-hand furniture and prints from a big-box store. The thought was perversely comforting. Their divorce, finalized 2 years ago, had been his masterpiece, or so he believed. Eleanor had been blindsided by his affair with Chloe. She'd been a quiet, unassuming woman, a librarian of all things when they first met. She was intelligent, kind, and possessed a gentle grace that had in the beginning soothed his restless ambition. But as his star rose, her quiet nature began to feel like a liability. She didn't play the part of a billionaire's wife. She wore simple dresses, preferred the public library to private clubs, and seemed utterly unimpressed by the numbers in their bank account. During the divorce proceedings, she had been strangely passive. Her lawyer was a small-time public service type who was completely out of his depth against Julian's legal Rottweilers. She hadn't fought for the penthouse, the art collection, or a significant stake in his company. She'd asked only for a lump sum, a generous amount by any normal standard, but a pittance compared to what she could have claimed. She also asked for primary custody of their 10-year-old son Leo, to which Julian had readily agreed. He loved his son, but the day-to-day business of fatherhood was a distraction. He would see Leo on alternating weekends and holidays, a perfect arrangement for a man of his stature. He had walked away from that marriage feeling victorious, convinced that Eleanor was a fool. She had left the king and his castle for a life of obscurity. "Adequate," Chloe scoffed, rising from the chaise. She ran a perfectly manicured hand down his arm. "You mean you want to see her struggling? You want to see that she made a mistake. She wasn't wrong, but he would never admit it." "I'm concerned for my son," he said, his voice firm. "This address she gave my assistant. It's in Greenwich. I suppose she found a small rental cottage. Probably damp." Chloe's laughter was like tinkling glass. "Well, go on then. Go and perform your fatherly duty. And while you're there, try to remember that I'm the one living in the penthouse, darling." She kissed him a fleeting press of expensive lipstick and sashayed out of the room, leaving the scent of Chanel No. 5 and Victory in her wake. Julian stood for a moment longer, looking out the window. He felt a surge of power. He was Julian Davenport. He built empires. Eleanor was a footnote in his story, a cautionary tale. He grabbed the keys to his McLaren and the ridiculously large gift-wrapped box containing the latest, most expensive gaming console for his son. It was time to witness the consequences of her choices firsthand. The drive from Manhattan to Greenwich, Connecticut was a transition between worlds. Julian's McLaren sliced through traffic, a predator among minnows. As the gleaming skyscrapers of the city receded in his rear-view mirror, replaced by the manicured suburbs of Westchester County, his sense of smug superiority grew with every mile. He had the address punched into the car's navigation system. 14 Sutton Place, Greenwich. He didn't recognize the street name, but he pictured it perfectly. A quiet, tree-lined road of modest post-war homes. The kinds of houses where people mowed their own lawns and knew their neighbors' names. The thought made him sneer. It was all so common. He imagined the scene that awaited him. Eleanor would answer the door, her face etched with the weariness of a single mother on a budget. Perhaps she'd have gained a little weight. Her clothes would be worn practical. She would be flustered by his sudden appearance, embarrassed by her humble surroundings. He would be gracious, of course. He would step inside for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the cramped living room, the scuffed furniture, the faint smell of boiled vegetables. He would offer a vague, pitying platitude. "You seem to be managing well, Eleanor, all things considered." The cruelty of the thought gave him a dark thrill. It wasn't just about him winning. It was about her visibly, tangibly losing. He had offered her a world of limitless luxury, and she had chosen this. He needed to see it to confirm the narrative he had constructed in his mind. It was the final validation of his life's choices. As the GPS directed him off the main highway, the character of the neighborhoods began to shift, but not in the direction he expected. The houses grew larger, set further back from the road. The manicured lawns became sprawling acres. The simple wooden fences were replaced by towering stone walls and imposing iron gates. Recalculating, the synthesized voice of the GPS announced as he passed a street that looked more like the entrance to a country club. Julian frowned. This wasn't right. This was the heart of old money Greenwich. These weren't houses. They were estates. Sprawling compounds that had been in the same families for generations, their fortunes rooted in steel railroads and banking, not volatile tech stocks. His own home, a modern marvel of architecture in the Hamptons, was grander and more expensive than many of these, but it lacked their gravitas, their silent, unshakable assertion of permanence. His was a mansion. These were legacies. He must have typed the address in wrong. He pulled over to the side of the pristine road, the McLaren looking almost vulgar against the backdrop of quiet, aristocratic wealth. He checked his phone, cross-referencing the address his assistant had emailed him. No, it was correct. 14 Sutton Place. He continued driving, a knot of confusion tightening in his stomach. The houses became even more secluded, hidden behind dense copses of ancient oaks and maples. He finally turned onto Sutton Place, a private road marked by 2 discrete stone pillars. The road itself was narrow, winding, and lined with more stone walls, each one punctuated by a set of formidable gates. "You have arrived at your destination," the GPS declared. Julian slowed the car to a stop. He was parked in front of a set of magnificent wrought iron gates at least 20 feet high. Intricate scrollwork formed a stylized H at their center. Beyond the gates, a long, crushed stone driveway curved gracefully through a park-like expanse of emerald green lawn, disappearing behind a stand of weeping willows. He couldn't even see the house. All he could see was land acres of it dotted with mature trees and what looked like a formal garden in the distance. To the left of the gate set into the stone wall was a small, elegant bronze plaque. It read simply, Hayes Estate. This was impossible. A mistake. A cruel joke. Eleanor's maiden name was Hayes, but it couldn't be this. Her family was from Ohio. Her father was a retired history professor, her mother a homemaker. They lived in a modest Tudor-style house in a quiet college town. He'd met them half a dozen times. They were pleasant, unremarkable people. His mind raced trying to find a logical explanation. Had she gotten a job here? Was she a nanny? A housekeeper? The idea was absurd. Eleanor, with her master's degree in library science, working as domestic staff, no. But the alternative that she lived here was even more preposterous. His smug anticipation had curdled into a bewildering unease. The pity he had been so eager to dispense was gone, replaced by a profound sense of dislocation. He felt like an intruder, a trespasser in a world he didn't understand. He took a deep breath, the expensive leather of his car's interior suddenly feeling cheap and confining. There was only one way to find out. He pressed the button on the intercom next to the gate. A moment of silence, then a crisp, disembodied voice spoke, utterly devoid of warmth. Yes. Julian cleared his throat. Yes. My name is Julian Davenport. I'm here to see Eleanor. Eleanor Hayes. I'm dropping something off for our son Leo. There was another pause, longer this time. Julian could imagine the person on the other end, a security guard or butler, checking a list. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. Then, without another word, a soft click echoed through the speaker, and the massive iron gates began to swing silently, smoothly inward, revealing the path ahead. It was an invitation into a reality he was not prepared for. Driving the McLaren up the winding driveway felt like an act of sacrilege. The car's low, throaty growl seemed to tear at the profound silence of the estate. The driveway itself was longer than the entire street his parents lived on. It snaked past a tennis court, a vast shimmering swimming pool that looked more like a small lake, and a rose garden so large and meticulously kept, it could have supplied a royal wedding. Finally, as he rounded a final bend, the house came into view, and it stopped him cold. Julian had seen grand houses before. He owned several. But this was something else entirely. It wasn't a house. It was a manor. A sprawling 3-story Georgian mansion of weathered gray stone, covered in ivy, that looked as old as the country itself. Dozens of multi-paned windows gleamed in the afternoon sun. A series of perfectly proportioned wings extended from the central block, ending in what looked like a conservatory on one side and a formal library on the other. It wasn't flashy or modern like his own properties. It didn't scream, "Look at my money." It whispered with unshakable confidence, "Money is not a concern here. It never has been." His own multi-million-dollar Hamptons beach house with its infinity pool and floor-to-ceiling glass walls suddenly felt like a gaudy new money cliché. A child's drawing of wealth compared to this old master's painting. He brought the car to a stop in a circular courtyard centered on a tiered stone fountain. Before he could even unbuckle his seatbelt, the massive dark oak front door opened. A man who looked to be in his late 60s stood there. He was tall and impossibly thin, dressed in a simple but perfectly tailored black suit with a crisp white shirt. His white hair was neatly combed and his expression was one of polite professional neutrality. He was the quintessential butler straight out of a classic film. The man descended the 3 stone steps and opened Julian's car door for him, a gesture so foreign and unexpected that Julian simply stared for a second. Mr. Davenport, the butler, said, his voice the same crisp, calm tone from the intercom. "Welcome. My name is Mr. Finch. Madam is expecting you in the solarium." Madam. The word echoed in Julian's skull. Not Eleanor, not Ms. Hayes. Madam. Julian stumbled out of the car, clutching the oversized gift for Leo like a shield. It looked absurdly out of place in this setting. Mr. Finch didn't even glance at it. His gaze was fixed on Julian, polite but assessing. "If you'll follow me, sir." Julian walked behind him, his expensive Italian shoes crunching on the gravel. The air smelled of damp earth, old stone, and blooming flowers. He felt clumsy, oafish. He, Julian Davenport, who commanded boardrooms and made markets tremble, felt like a delivery boy. The interior of the house was even more breathtaking than the exterior. The foyer was a 2-story rotunda with a checkerboard floor of black and white marble. A sweeping staircase with a polished mahogany banister curved up to a galleried landing. The walls were lined with what looked like genuine oil paintings, portraits of stern-faced men and elegant women from centuries past. There were no flashy sculptures or modern art installations, just quiet ancestral power. Mr. Finch led him through a series of rooms, a formal drawing room with silk wallpaper and antique furniture, a dining room that could easily seat 30 beneath a crystal chandelier the size of a small car, each one more opulent and yet more tastefully appointed than the last. The sheer scale of it was disorienting. This wasn't a home. It was a museum where people happened to live. Finally, they reached a pair of glass-paned doors at the back of the house. Mr. Finch opened them and gestured for Julian to enter. "Mr. Davenport to see you, madam." And there she was. The room was a solarium, a beautiful glass-walled space overlooking a vast rolling lawn that sloped down towards what Julian now realized was the Long Island Sound. The room was filled with lush greenery, orchids, and comfortable-looking wicker furniture. In the center of it, sitting in a high-backed armchair with a book in her lap, was Eleanor. She was not the weary, downtrodden woman of his imagination. She wore a simple, cream-colored linen dress that skimmed her knees. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back into a loose, elegant knot at the nape of her neck. Her face was serene, unlined by worry. In fact, she looked younger, more rested, and more beautiful than he had seen her in years. She looked radiant. At her feet, engrossed in building a complex Lego creation, was their son Leo. He looked up as Julian entered, his face breaking into a wide grin. "Dad," Eleanor looked up from her book and her eyes met Julian's. There was no shock, no embarrassment, no fear in her expression. There was only a calm, knowing placidity. She smiled, a small, gentle curve of her lips that held a universe of meaning he couldn't begin to decipher. "Julian," she said, her voice as calm and clear as a bell. "How good of you to drop by. We were just about to have tea. I trust you had no trouble finding the place." The question, so innocently phrased, hung in the air like a guillotine. "I trust you had no trouble finding the place." Julian's mind, usually a high-speed processor of data and strategy, sputtered to a halt. He stood frozen in the doorway of the solarium, the garishly wrapped gift for Leo feeling heavier and more ridiculous by the second. His prepared speeches, his condescending pity, his entire sense of self evaporated in the sun-drenched, orchid-filled room. "Dad, look!" Leo jumped up, abandoning his Lego masterpiece, and ran to him. "I'm building a Star Destroyer, Mr. Finch helped me with the foundational pylons." Julian looked from his beaming son to the impossibly calm butler, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The butler was helping his son with Lego. The sheer domesticity of it, set against this backdrop of staggering wealth, was surreal. That's great, son," Julian managed, his voice sounding hoarse and unfamiliar to his own ears. He handed the box to Leo, who took it with a whoop of joy. "Wow. The new Omni station, thanks, Dad." Leo tore at the wrapping paper, completely oblivious to the tectonic plates of his father's reality shifting beneath his feet. Eleanor slowly placed a bookmark in her novel and set it aside. She rose from her armchair with the unhurried grace he remembered, but now it was imbued with a confidence and authority he had never seen before. She was no longer just Eleanor, the quiet librarian. She was the mistress of this domain. "Madam, Leo, darling, why don't you take your new toy up to the playroom? Mr. Finch can help you set it up after tea." "Okay, Mom," Leo said, already wrestling the huge box towards the door. Mr. Finch stepped forward. "Allow me." "Master Leo," the butler said, lifting the box with an ease that belied his age. He glanced at Julian. "Will you be requiring anything, sir?" Julian just shook his head mute. Mr. Finch nodded and departed, leaving Julian alone with his ex-wife. The silence that followed was deafening. Julian's gaze darted around the room from the priceless-looking orchids to the sweeping view of the ocean to the woman standing before him. He felt like a man who had been sleepwalking and had just woken up on the edge of a cliff. "Eleanor." "What is this?" he finally choked out. "Where are we?" "We're at home, Julian," she replied simply. She gestured to an armchair opposite hers. "Please sit. You look like you're about to faint." He sank into the chair, the soft cushion doing nothing to comfort him. He felt exposed, stripped bare. His McLaren in the driveway, his Patek Philippe on his wrist, the billion-dollar company with his name on it, all of it felt like a cheap costume. This is your home," he stammered. "How your parents? The house in Ohio?" A flicker of something, was it amusement, pity, crossed her face. "My parents do live in a lovely Tudor in Ohio. They like it there. My father enjoys his quiet life as a retired academic. It's what they chose. But this place..." The gate said Hayes Estate. "Yes," she said, as if stating the most obvious fact in the world. "This is my family's home, my grandmother's specifically. I grew up spending my summers here." Julian's mind was a maelstrom of confusion. "Your family, your family, they were..." He trailed off, unsure how to finish. Normal, unimpressive. Poor. They were exactly what they appeared to be. Eleanor finished for him, her voice gentle but firm. "My father is a Hayes, yes. But he is the third son. A man who valued academia and a quiet life far more than boardrooms and stock portfolios. He stepped away from the family business a long time ago. He wanted to raise his children outside of all this." She made a sweeping gesture that encompassed the mansion, the grounds, the legacy. "The family business?" Julian asked, his voice barely a whisper. Just then, a young woman in a crisp black and white uniform entered soundlessly with a silver tray. On it was a teapot, 2 fine china cups, and a plate of delicate pastries. She set it down on the table between them and departed as quietly as she had arrived. Eleanor began to pour the tea. The simple domestic act was a stark contrast to the earth-shattering revelations unfolding. Her hands were steady. "Hayes Industrial," she said, handing him a cup. He took it automatically, his fingers numb. "My great-grandfather, Jonathan Hayes, started it in 1908, steel shipping manufacturing. Later, telecommunications and private equity. You might have heard of it." "Heard of it, Hayes." Industrial was a titan, an old-money behemoth, a cornerstone of the American economy. It was a private company still majority-owned by the Hayes family, which made its true value a subject of speculation, but everyone knew it was in the stratosphere far beyond his own flashy tech fortune. They were the kind of people who didn't appear on magazine covers because they owned the magazines. He stared at her, the woman he had been married to for 12 years. The woman he had patronized, pitied, and discarded. "You? You're one of those Hayes?" "I am a Hayes." "Yes," she said, taking a sip of her tea. "I never lied to you, Julian. You just never asked the right questions. You were so blinded by your own ambition, so convinced of your own narrative, the brilliant boy from the middle class who made it big, that you couldn't see anything else. You saw a quiet librarian from Ohio, and that's all you wanted to see. It fit your story. The woman you saved from a life of mediocrity. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart puncturing his ego. He remembered their first dates, his grand pronouncements about his future, his boasts about the empire he would build. She had just listened, her expression thoughtful, encouraging. He had mistaken her quietness for awe. Now he realized it had been something else entirely: observation. Assessment. So the whole time, our whole marriage. "I loved you, Julian," she said, and for the first time a note of sadness entered her voice. or I loved the man I thought you could be. I wanted a life outside of this cage as beautiful as it is. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for my family's name or trust fund. When I met you, you were so driven, so full of life. I thought we could build a real life together on our own terms." She looked out at the ocean. "But the more successful you became, the more you changed. You became a caricature of a rich man. You started to believe your own hype. The man I fell in love with disappeared, and in his place was Julian Davenport, the brand." Julian sat in stunned silence, the porcelain teacup rattling in its saucer. He wasn't the king who had cast off a commoner. He was the court jester who had been dismissed by the queen. The silence in the solarium stretched thick with the weight of 12 years of unspoken truths. Julian's world had been turned upside down, the very foundations of his identity pulverized. He had built his life on the belief that he was the master of his own destiny, the architect of his own success. Now he was forced to confront the staggering possibility that he had been a mere character in someone else's play. The divorce, he finally said the words feeling like gravel in his mouth. "I don't understand. Your lawyer, he was incompetent. My team ran circles around him. You could have taken me for half of everything." Eleanor set her teacup down with a soft click. A wry, almost sad smile touched her lips. "Oh, Julian, you really have no idea, do you?" She leaned forward slightly, her calm demeanor shifting into something more direct, more clinical. It was the tone of a CEO explaining a complex strategy to a junior executive. "Mr. Abernathy, my lawyer. He's a lovely man. His specialty is pro bono work for tenants' rights. He was, as you so accurately perceived, completely out of his depth, and that was precisely the point." Julian stared at her, uncomprehending. "You see," she continued, "my family doesn't use lawyers like Mr. Abernathy for matters like this. My family retains the services of firms like Sullivan and Cromwell, firms that have entire departments dedicated to the preservation of generational wealth. Firms whose junior partners could have financially dismantled you and your entire company before their morning coffee." Her words were delivered without malice, as a simple statement of fact, which made them all the more devastating. "I instructed them not to engage. I told them to stand down and simply observe. Your legal team, puffed up with arrogance and facing no real opposition, became sloppy. They were so focused on the win that they didn't look closely at what they were winning." She picked up her book, tapping its cover thoughtfully. "You thought the settlement was your idea, your victory. A lump sum, a clean break. It seemed so generous of you, letting me walk away with a few $1,000,000. A pittance, you called it. But that lump sum wasn't for me to live on, Julian. It was pocket money. It was the price of my silence and your continued ignorance." The room began to feel smaller, the air thinner. He was beginning to see the edges of a plan so intricate, so subtle, that he had walked right through the middle of it without ever suspecting its existence. But why, he asked, his voice strained. Why go through all of that? Why not just leave? "Because of Leo," she said, her voice softening. "And because of you. I knew about Chloe long before you confessed. I knew about the others before her. My family's resources are extensive. I could have exposed you. I could have created a scandal that would have tarnished your company and your reputation permanently. But a messy public divorce would have hurt Leo. And believe it or not, I didn't want to destroy you. I just wanted you out of my life." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "So I let you believe you were the one in control. I let you think you were the one ending things, that you were the one who had outgrown me. It was the easiest way to get you to sign the papers without a fight. Your ego was your greatest weakness, Julian. I simply used it to my advantage. You were so busy congratulating yourself on your brilliant escape that you never once thought to look back and see who was really holding the key to the cage." He thought back to the condescending things he'd said to her during their final months, the pitying looks, the pronouncements about how she'd never make it without him. She had absorbed it all with that same quiet grace, which he had mistaken for weakness. It was, he now saw, the most profound strength. The strength of a person so secure in their position that the opinions of lesser beings were like the buzzing of a fly, annoying but ultimately irrelevant. The prenup, he whispered, remembering the ironclad document his lawyers had drafted before their wedding. He had been so proud of it. Eleanor actually laughed a genuine, quiet laugh. Oh, the prenup. Julian, my family's lawyers, invented the modern prenuptial agreement. The template your lawyers used. It was based on a framework pioneered by my grandfather's legal team in the 1960s to protect the family from gold diggers. They knew every loophole because they had created them. My signing that document was a formality. It was designed to protect my assets from you, not the other way around. You were so proud of protecting your few million in tech stocks you never even thought to ask about the century-old trust I was a beneficiary of. It was the final crushing blow. The entire architecture of his victory, his superiority, his very identity as the powerful man in the relationship collapsed into dust. He wasn't the victor. He wasn't even a participant. He was the fool. He was the mark in the longest, most elegant con he could possibly imagine. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time he saw not the mousy librarian or the spurned wife, but a woman of formidable intelligence and power. A woman who had played him so perfectly that he had danced willingly to her tune, all while believing he was the conductor of the orchestra. He hadn't just been divorced. He had been surgically and masterfully excised. The drive back to Manhattan was a blur. Julian couldn't recall a single moment of it. The McLaren, which usually felt like an extension of his own power, now felt like a clown car. Its roar was not a sign of strength, but a scream of impotent rage. He drove on autopilot, his mind replaying Eleanor's words, each one a fresh stab to his shattered ego. Your ego was your greatest weakness. You were so busy congratulating yourself. Firms that could have financially dismantled you before their morning coffee. He pulled into the private underground garage of Davenport Tower, the screech of his tires echoing in the cavernous space. He didn't wait for the valet. He slammed the car door and strode towards the private elevator, his face a thunderous mask. When the elevator doors opened directly into his penthouse, the scene that greeted him was one of jarring dissonance. Chloe was lounging on a vast white leather sofa, scrolling through her phone. The television was on, tuned to some mindless reality show. The entire apartment, which he had once seen as the pinnacle of modern luxury, now looked garish, loud, and desperately new. The chrome fixtures seemed cheap, the abstract art felt meaningless, and the panoramic view of the city no longer looked like a kingdom at his feet, but a lonely, glittering cage. So Chloe said, without looking up from her phone, "How was the hovel? Did you have to wipe your feet on the way out?" Julian didn't answer. He walked to the bar, his hands trembling slightly as he poured a large measure of Macallan 25 into a crystal tumbler. Chloe finally looked up, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Julian, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," he said, his voice low and dangerous. He downed the scotch in one go, the burn in his throat a welcome distraction from the inferno in his mind. "What does that mean?" she asked, sitting up. Her tone was no longer mocking, but laced with a new sharp-edged anxiety. "What happened? Where does she live?" Julian turned to face her, his eyes dark. "She lives in the Hayes estate in Greenwich." Chloe's perfectly sculpted eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "The what? What's a Hayes estate?" "It's not a Hayes estate," Julian snapped. "It's the Hayes estate, as in Hayes Industrial, as in her family could buy and sell me 10 times over and not even notice the transaction fee." Chloe's jaw dropped. The carefully constructed mask of bored superiority fell away, revealing naked, grasping panic. "What? That's impossible. Her family are... Nobody's from Ohio. Her father is," Julian said, pouring another drink. "Her great-grandfather was Jonathan Hayes. She's an heiress. The whole thing, our entire marriage, was a lie. She was slumming it with me." The reality of it hit Chloe like a physical blow. Her mind, always quick to calculate social and financial positioning, raced through the implications. Eleanor wasn't a pathetic ex-wife. She was a member of the American aristocracy, a level of wealth and power that made their own billion-dollar lifestyle look like a child's playpen. She has what Chloe shrieked, her voice rising in pitch. And you didn't know. How could you not know? You were married to her for 12 years. She hid it. Julian roared, slamming his glass down on the marble bar. She played the part. She let me think I was the one with the power, the one with the money. So, the divorce... Chloe's eyes were wide with horror. That settlement. Oh my God, Julian. She played you. She played you for a fool. It was the one thing he couldn't bear to hear, especially from her. Shut up, Chloe. No, she shot back, her fear morphing into fury. You let her get away. She's sitting in some ancestral mansion laughing at us. Laughing at me. Do you know what this means? Everyone will find out. They'll all know your first wife was from a bigger, better, richer family. They'll say you fumbled it. They'll say she dumped you for being inadequate. She threw his own word back at him like a spear. He flinched. She was right. In the rarefied world they inhabited, perception was everything. He wasn't just the brilliant, self-made billionaire anymore. He was the idiot who hadn't realized his wife was a dynastic heiress. He was the man she had discarded. His entire narrative was a sham. The fight escalated, their voices echoing through the vast, empty penthouse. Chloe's accusations were a torrent of insecurity and wounded pride, not for him, but for herself. Her position as the new upgraded Mrs. Davenport was suddenly threatened by the ghost of a predecessor who turned out to be royalty. His anger was a storm of humiliation, a defense mechanism against the crushing weight of his own folly. In the midst of their shouting, Julian's phone buzzed on the counter. It was a notification from his head of acquisitions. He glanced at it, his blood running cold. Subject: urgent. Blackstone acquisition message, sir. We have a problem. A new player has entered a surprise competing bid for Blackstone Robotics. It's a blind trust, but the funding traces back to a holding company owned by Hayes Industrial. Julian stared at the screen, the words blurring together. Blackstone Robotics was a strategic acquisition he had been working on for 6 months. A move that would have secured his company's dominance for the next decade. Hayes Industrial. It wasn't a coincidence. This was not a random business move. This was a message. Eleanor hadn't just humiliated him personally. She was now coming for him professionally. The quiet, elegant chess game she had played in their marriage was over. Now she was flipping the board over. He had thought he was a king. He was just a pawn, and he had just been taken. The weeks that followed were not a swift execution, but a slow, public strangulation. The battle for Blackstone Robotics became the premier spectator sport in the financial world. Julian, accustomed to being the aggressor, the corporate raider, was forced into a defensive posture. In the glass-walled boardroom on the 40th floor of Davenport Tower, the mood grew increasingly grim. "They've countered again," said Marcus, his head of acquisitions staring at his screen with a mixture of awe and terror. "They didn't just match our latest offer. They added another $1 billion on top. It's irrational." "It's not irrational if the money is infinite," Julian muttered, staring out at the city. He felt trapped, a rat in a maze designed by a far superior intelligence. Every move he made, every clever financial instrument he leveraged, was met with a tidal wave of capital from the blind trust backed by Hayes Industrial. They weren't just trying to win, they were making a statement. They were demonstrating that he was not in their league. The final blow came during a conference call with his bankers from Goldman Sachs. The lead banker, a man who had courted Julian's business for years, sounded strained. "Julian, we can't advise you to go further. To match this latest offer, you'd have to leverage 70% of Davenport Digital's liquid assets. The risk exposure would be catastrophic. If there's even a slight market downturn in the next quarter, you'd face margin calls that could trigger a complete collapse." Julian gripped the phone, his knuckles white. "So we let them have it." There was a pause. "Julian, they already have it. The deal is done. They announced it 5 minutes ago. They didn't even wait for a counter. They just 1. The line went dead, but Julian kept the phone pressed to his ear. It was over. The crown jewel of his expansion strategy had been plucked from his grasp with insulting ease. He had been publicly, professionally, and utterly neutered. The fallout was immediate. The whispers that had started after his visit to Greenwich now became a roar. Forbes and the Wall Street Journal ran lengthy profiles not on his business acumen, but on the rise and humbling of Julian Davenport. They painted a picture of a new money upstart who had been put in his place by the old-world power of his ex-wife's family. His story was no longer an inspiration. It was a cautionary tale. To combat the narrative, Chloe insisted they attend the annual Metropolitan Museum of Art Gala, the pinnacle of the New York social calendar. "We have to show them we're not bothered," she'd said, her voice brittle with desperation. "We have to look powerful." So he wore the tuxedo, and she wore a breathtaking custom-made Oscar de la Renta gown. They walked the red carpet smiling under the flash of 1,000 cameras. But once inside, the chill was palpable. People who had once clamored for a moment of his time now offered curt nods before turning their backs. He saw a huddle of powerful hedge fund managers glance their way and share a smirk. A prominent socialite, Beatrice Vanderbilt, a woman Chloe had idolized, walked past them and greeted the person behind them with effusive warmth, cutting Chloe dead. The ultimate humiliation came when Chloe approached an old friend, a woman whose husband's tech startup Julian had once bailed out. Darling Chloe began only for the woman to give her a pitying look. "Chloe, you look—" "Well?" the woman said, her eyes flicking towards Julian. "Tough break with the Blackstone deal. I suppose some leagues are just out of reach. We all find our level eventually." The comment, dripping with condescension, struck Chloe like a slap. They left early, the ride back to the penthouse a vortex of toxic silence. The moment the elevator doors sealed them in their apartment, the facade shattered. "This is your fault!" Chloe shrieked, tearing off her diamond earrings and hurling them onto the marble floor. "You made us a joke. Find our level." She was talking about me. She was saying, "I'm second-rate because I'm with you." "And what about you, Chloe?" Julian retorted, his voice dangerously low. "Were you with me for my scintillating personality, or for the status and the money you thought I had? A status that now looks a little less impressive next to Eleanor's." "Don't you dare say her name to me," she screamed. "She beat you. A quiet little librarian beat you, and you didn't even see it coming. What kind of a man are you?" Their fight was ugly and raw, stripping away the last vestiges of their transactional arrangement. He saw her for what she was, a terrified, materialistic woman whose entire identity was built on the prestige he provided. And she saw him as a failed king, a tarnished brand. The argument ended with her packing a suitcase, sobbing not for the loss of their marriage, but for the loss of her position. "I'm going to my mother's in Palm Beach," she'd announced. "I can't be seen with you right now." The silence she left behind was more deafening than the shouting. A week later, hollowed out and adrift, Julian did the one thing he felt he had to do. He called Eleanor's private number, a number he'd had to get from her lawyer to arrange to see Leo. He needed an anchor, a reminder of something real. The drive back to Greenwich was a pilgrimage of shame. He took a simple black sedan this time, not the McLaren. As he pulled up to the gates of the Hayes estate, they opened without him having to announce himself. They were expecting him. Mr. Finch greeted him at the door. His expression was the same neutral professional, but today it felt like a silent judgment. "Master Leo is in the gardens with his grandmother," the butler said, leading him not through the house but around the side along a stone path. And there, on the rolling green lawn that sloped towards the sea, was Leo. He was flying a kite with an elegant white-haired woman Julian had never met, but knew instantly must be Genevieve Hayes, the matriarch of the clan. Eleanor was there too, sitting on a bench reading a book, a picture of tranquility. Leo saw him and waved, but he didn't run to him this time. He was engrossed in his world, a world where Julian was a visitor, an outsider. Julian walked over, feeling the weight of 3 generations of Hayes eyes on him. "Dad, Grandma Genevieve is teaching me about thermal updrafts," Leo said excitedly. Genevieve Hayes turned to him. Her eyes, a pale, intelligent blue, were startlingly like Eleanor's. They held no malice, just a calm, powerful assessment. "Mr. Davenport," she said, her voice clear and strong. "A pleasure to finally meet you. Eleanor has told me so much about you." The simple sentence was laden with a terrifying ambiguity. His conversation with Leo was stilted, awkward. He was a guest in his son's life. After a few painful minutes, he made his excuses and walked away feeling smaller than he ever had in his life. As he left, he glanced back. He saw Eleanor get up and put a comforting arm around Leo, the two of them watching Genevieve expertly handle the kite. A perfect family picture with a gaping hole where he was supposed to be. That night, back in the cavernous, empty penthouse, he sat in his home office, a single glass of whiskey in his hand. The digital frame on his desk was still paused on that old photo from the county fair. Him, Eleanor, Leo, a lifetime ago. He stared at the laughing face of the man on the screen, the man who had the whole world in front of him and, more importantly, had the love of a good woman by his side. He had traded that man's life for this, an empire of glass and steel, built on a foundation of ego now cracking under its own weight. He had been given a choice between real gold and glittering pyrite, and he had chosen the fool's treasure. He thought he had lost a deal. He thought he had lost his reputation. He thought he had lost his wife. But as he sat alone in the dark, the city lights like distant cold stars, he finally understood the devastating truth. He hadn't lost them. He had thrown them all away. And in doing so, he had lost the one thing he could never get back himself. The silence of his gilded cage was the only answer to his ruin, and it was a prison of his own magnificent, idiotic design. Julian Davenport learned a brutal lesson. True wealth isn't measured in stock portfolios or skyscrapers, but in the things you cannot buy: love, integrity, and the quiet dignity of a life well lived. He flew too close to the sun, blinded by his own reflection, and in the end he was burned not by a business rival, but by the quiet, formidable power of a woman he had completely underestimated. His story is a chilling reminder that pride is the most expensive luxury, and its downfall is often orchestrated not with a bang, but with a whisper. What do you think Julian will do next? Can he ever recover his reputation, or more importantly, his soul? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of pride, deception, and ultimate karma, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good drama, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that uncover the secrets hidden behind the doors of the wealthy. Don't miss out on our next tale of twists and turns.